So I have test knitted 21 times. 21 test knits. And it's not for me. Honestly, I need to stop test knitting. This is a reaction video to Izzy Knits, and she released a video why I'm no longer test knitting, and I wanted to do a reaction video and share my thoughts. And I'm hoping this will create some kind of discussion in the knitting community. And I wanted to share, as a serial test knitter, I want to share how I feel about everything, and I want to see what you think. Or maybe you've never test knitted before, so maybe this is informative for you and helps you make different decisions. My first point is, why would you test knit in the first place? I think test knitting is something, for me personally, was something I saw on Instagram when I first started knitting. I saw all these test calls coming out, and I thought it was amazing that you could test knit for a designer that you were following. So I applied for a lot of test knits right at the beginning when I found knitting Instagram. And I thought what I would get out of it was mostly, wow, that's such a beautiful sweater. I want to make that. And now there's a deadline linked to it. And maybe I'll find some community out of it. But the honest truth is, I haven't made any friends from any test knit. So I think most of my knitting online friends I've made through YouTube and through just being on knitting Instagram and like following people and getting into conversations with people, but not from test knitting together with people. I don't know, maybe it's different for other people, but I have not had that. And it was something I was definitely looking forward to finding in test knitting, to find a sense of community. I didn't find that. Also, why would you test knit in the first place? If you think this is a way to grow some kind of social media presence, it's not going to help you. So you might think, and Izzy Knits also touched on this subject, was if you think that it will help your Instagram grow because your post will get shared, it doesn't. Just knit whatever you want, and that will make you grow by the same rate. And I am not big on Instagram at all, so I don't know anything about Instagram, but test knitting does not help at all. So that's my take on that. And also, the thing is, so you think, okay, why would I test knit in the first place? You maybe have all of these reasons why you wouldn't want to test knit, but then before you know it, you've already signed up. I think a lot of times when I see a test knit, I'm like, wow, that's beautiful. I can make it. And I can give myself a deadline, which is the deadline of the test knit. And then I'll have that finished object. And I find it hard sometimes to make deadlines for myself and to have myself to respond to. It's nicer to have somebody else that you are supposed to knit for. But then you're just creating deadlines. So what are you doing in the first place? Because we're here to do a hobby. Why would I make this into work too? Speaking of work, the process. So you are knitting an entire garment or hat or whatever the test knit is. So you are testing, you are providing feedback for the designer, but that feedback, I have had a few times where I've had, I thought, pretty valuable feedback, but then the designer didn't really do anything with that, which kind of almost feels like I'm doing something wrong. So I am telling them something about that I would change of their pattern, and it almost feels like I'm saying something wrong to them. Whereas you are trying to help them. So if you feel like your feedback is not taken, like, why are you doing it in the first place? I thought people needed testers to give them honest feedback. And then the moment you give honest feedback, it might be that they're like, okay, I'm not going to do anything with this. But that makes you feel, at least it made me feel, rejected. And I know that Izzy Knits talked about rejection in the application process. I don't really find that to be a really big thing for me. The rejection for me was mostly in the test knit while giving feedback, to feel like my feedback is rejected. because I think I have a valuable opinion. I am a good knitter, and I have an opinion about how a pattern should be built up, especially after 21 test knits and more knitting experience. But that felt like a big rejection if your feedback is not taken seriously. Also, in the process, there's the deadline stress. So you have the deadline of like 6 weeks. And for me, at the start, I applied. I thought, okay, in 6 weeks, I'll have a cute new top or whatever. And then the end is approaching and you feel bad. You feel bad that you cannot do your part of the deal. You made the deal with them and you cannot provide your part of the deal. A lot of designers are okay with you just saying, hey, I'm sorry, life happened. I didn't get to finish the test knit. And then a lot of designers are totally okay with that, but it still makes you feel bad, like you did something wrong. Whereas, and this will get me to my third point, which is the reward. What do you even get in return? I think this is the biggest thing is why are we doing this? Why are we giving free time, free knowledge, free everything to a designer? Why are we doing this? I don't know. And I've been thinking about it for myself too, and especially seeing that video of Is He Knits made me think about it again. Why did I do 21 test knits? I really don't know, because what did I get in return? I think I maybe received a few free patterns. A lot of times after completing a test knit, you can pick out a free pattern from the designer's catalog. And other than that, there's nothing really that you get in return. Whereas a sweater can take 40 hours to knit, maybe even more. It depends on the weight of yarn and everything. Especially sometimes you have to rip out a whole section of your test knit because the pattern wasn't adequately tested yet, because that's what you're doing. So it can really add up in hours, and that's free labor. So why are we giving free labor to somebody? And I know that knitting designers do not really make that much money. They only charge €5 or $5 or something along those lines for one pattern, for a knitting pattern, and they cannot afford to pay test knitters. So I don't know what the alternative would be, but I do think, why would you test knit if all you get in return is a pattern worth another €5? So basically you're putting in 40 plus hours for €5. Why would you do that? Why are we doing this? I don't know. I don't have the answer. If you do, please let me know why we do this. Why do you think we do this? Also, one time I test knitted for a big yarn brand who was opening a design branch. And I test knitted. I uploaded everything. I did everything I needed to do as a test knitter. But I did not get my £5 of reward from their store. So I was supposed to get, as a reward, I would get a discount on some of the yarn that they sell as a big yarn brand. And honestly, that's just awful, because I feel awkward, because I feel like I did something wrong. Here's that rejection and that feeling like I did something wrong again. I feel like I did something wrong, whereas I spent 40 hours knitting a sweater and I never got my return, my reward. So why are we putting up with this? And I think that also shows that there are really a bunch of examples. I bet there's a lot more. So please share if you have a bad testing experience. But I think there's so many bad experiences where honestly knitting designers have just taken advantage of knitters. And my final point is, are you actually happy with your finished objects? Because the pattern hasn't been tested yet, there's also the question of fit. So a lot of times you hand in feedback and you say how the fit is. And because you're testing, it could be that the fit is actually not that great. So it could be that your finished object is not how you wanted it to be. Also, because it's a test knit, you're supposed to follow all the rules of the pattern exactly to like everything that they say, which can lead that you're used to maybe knitting. That's what I do. You kind of auto correct along the way. Izzy Knits touched on this point too. But then for the test knit, you are supposed to do it in a certain way. But that could mean that your finished object is not how you want it to be. So, for example, if the body is knit until 40 centimeters under your armpit, but you like more cropped sweaters, you're not supposed to crop your sweater. But then if you have your finished object, what are you going to do? Are you going to rip back and then change it again afterwards? Because you should be happy with your finished object no matter what. I do know there are a few knitting designers who are okay with you making adjustments along the way. Most of my experience is that knitting designers want you to test the pattern exactly according to pattern. Then, to make it a little more lighthearted, what's the alternative? So I thought, okay, what did I want to get out of test knitting and what is the alternative for me? So you want to create some kind of community. I think what you can still do if you are really want to test knit is to test knit for knitters online that you know. So if you are, for example, chatting with somebody on Instagram every once in a while, you can test knit for them. I have test knitted for somebody that I chat with a lot of times. That was Knits and Fika on Instagram, and I test knitted a scarf for her, and that was a really nice process. So that felt really good, and I didn't feel bad afterwards at all. So I feel like if you kind of have knitting friends, then it's still kind of nice to test knit. But as an alternative for test knitting at all is, for me, it's the deadline. So how can I create a deadline for myself? And actually just look at what I actually want, because that's another point with the finished object. Are you happy with the finished object? Well, maybe I would have rather had something else over this test knit finished object. So really look at my favorites on Ravelry and make a good plan what I want to be knitting, because there's so much I still want to be knitting, and then just following those things and not put a deadline on myself, or at least put a deadline on myself and not have somebody else put a deadline on me through me applying for a test knit. So those were all my points for whether or not to test knit. I hope this will create some kind of discussion in the knitting world. What do you think about test knitting? I think we should be compensated a lot more fairly, and we should really think for ourselves, am I gonna give my time to this designer? And I would say mostly work with people that you know. So what do you think? Please let me know if you have any stories to share about test knitting. I would love to hear from you. Spill the tea. Bye.